This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 223. The practicality of a job guarantee.
Can you solve the battle between inflation and unemployment with the idea of a job guarantee? If there is a job there for everyone who wants one from the public sector, if there's not enough jobs in the private sector to go around, will that create price stability? And is that a better method than simply controlling interest rates and dallying with the odd bit of QE, which is the modus operandi of central banks currently? Or is a job guarantee one of those ideas that looks good in theory, but is totally impossible in practice? That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Well, Steve, it is a core plank in modern monetary theory. Central governments can create money when it's needed, of course. We know that. That's part of what MMT is all about. And the main focus should be full employment. If the private sector's going through a bit of a downturn, government should create jobs till there's demand back again from the private sector. In the meantime, those public sector jobs are going to create demand, and that's going to get the economy back on its feet quicker, better than everyone being on the dole, presumably. And the argument from modern monetary theorists, Steve, is that this is going to control inflation. But I can actually see it working the other way around. If I am guaranteed a job, well, I would be pushing for higher wages. I mean, that's what keeps wages down, is the fear that if you push too hard, you're going to be out of a job and there's no job to replace it. But if there's lots of jobs going around, I would push for higher wages because I know there's always going to be another job I can go to if my boss is sick of me asking for more money. Unless, of course, we're just talking about very low paid, lots of very low paid public sector jobs being created, in which case maybe I'd know that there's no point in moving on because I'm not going to get paid very well anywhere.
Well, that is one of the main things that people criticise MMT on. I'd actually distinguish like several stages of MMT, by the way. So the part that I have a complete agreement with is the analysis they make of the domestic monetary system and the fact that the government actually running a deficit creates the money in the private non-bank sector or the private non-government sector. It also creates the assets. Let the banking sector buy the bonds that are issued. So there's no difficulty in paying for paying for the bonds. The deficit itself creates the money that banks then use to purchase the bonds. So that is 100% about accounting, and it's incontrovertible. When you get
so you're going to say you're not a big supporter. You're not necessarily behind them on the job guarantee.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying I am, but I support the policy. This is what I'm saying. It's no longer a case of a description of the current system. It's a policy proposal now that we understand the nature of the system. And there's been, when you look at the people who have a job guarantee, there's as well as people promoting the job guarantee, and Bill Mitchell is probably the most outstanding instance here. There's also a lot of hostility towards every universal basic income, and so then you get if you can define that. First of all, you're showing that the government should be running a deficit because it creates the money the rest of us use for the level of economic activity we have. Then the question is, well, if that economic activity is such that there are people who would be willing to work at the going wage but can't get a job, so you have what Keynes called involuntary unemployment, then their proposal is we should have a job guarantee so that those people can, when the private sector has a downturn, rather than those people ending up unemployed, they can go into positions which, with the structure for which already exists, where they will be paid a lower wage than they would have got in the private sector, but still a wage and still have activity. And then a lot of the argument pro and anti universal basic income versus a job guarantee comes down to arguments about what is the psychological impact of someone being paid for doing nothing, being paid for doing a job.
Right, but that does sound a bit like work for the dole, doesn't it? I mean, it's exactly the same argument. In Australia, they had the work for the dole scheme, where if you're going to get paid the dole, which wasn't very much money, then you'd have to work for it. And you basically had. I mean, I think there was a great difficulty in creating those jobs.
This is the point where I've got some sympathy for some of the critics of MMT, even though in the sense that they say, well, what are those positions going to be? Now, the argument comes back, well, there's plenty of things we need to do, like particularly you focus on America and you look at the American economy and the state of American infrastructure. If you've driven in America?
No, it's low down on my list of things to do, I have to say.
Okay, it's
maybe from San Francisco to Los Angeles, I'd do that. But it's probably number 40 on my bucket list.
Well, I've driven on quite a few American roads, and I haven't hit every pothole in the country, but believe me, it's pretty easy to find them. So the quality of the bridges are literally quite literally. But in some cases,
that's what everyone says when you start looking at public sector jobs. You always look at infrastructure jobs, and not everyone is great at infrastructure. You might have somebody who's been working in an office who would be hopeless at filling in holes in the ground.
And this is one of the difficulties. I mean, the example that it's actually a very sensible example of what happens in a downturn. One of the first industries to normally suffer during a downturn is architecture. Because architects are all caught up in the building boom when you've got the skyscraper fantasy going on and you have the masses of houses being built and so on. Then a downturn hits, bang, all these draftsmen who spend their day drawing structures to be built by builders later, suddenly find themselves unemployed. Now the idea is, well, they'd go and work in a job guarantee position in a public sector, but that certainly wouldn't be as a draftsman. So you then have a range of issues about how does that affect the psychology of somebody. Is that going to be better than looking for a position in their own industry? It is not just a question of macroeconomics anymore. It's logistics as well.
And this is what, I hate to say it, public sector generally are not very good at logistics, are they? So if they've got to really engineer effective jobs on a periodic basis, because that is the idea, isn't it? They will only do this when the economy's on a downturn and there's fewer jobs around. So the public sector supposedly steps in. When things are good again, then supposedly they all go back to the private sector. But the public sector is pretty slow to react to change. I mean, everyone would say that right now with COVID-19, the public sector is forced to change faster than it ever has been before. But even then, it's too slow for the crisis we're facing. So I just wonder whether there's any reality behind any of this.
Well, I think it's a seriously difficult job. I mean, when we talking about a job guarantee versus bringing one in, it's a major undertaking to do it in a way that's going to function as a permanent buffer for the ups and downs of the private sector. If you look at and like this is. My focus has always been on modelling the impact of credit on causing cycles in the economy, and those cycles aren't going to go away with modern monetary theory alone. When you still have banks being able to create money and banks financing, speculative investments and the booms and busts we get out of that, so you're still going to have a cyclical private sector. And the question is, as you're saying, what's involved in then the public sector having a counter-cyclical flexibility to take people on and giving them jobs which won't be what they were doing when they were in the private sector, but will still be meaningful both to them and to the public sector itself. And it is not something to gloss over. It's something which if you're going to do it properly, then you have to start saying, well. I think this actually has been done by some of the modern monetary theory researchers, by the way. I haven't read the papers on the job guarantee, but I think Pavlina has been involved in some of that and saying, okay, what positions, what areas of lack of attention to the public sector exist at the moment that could be addressed if we had people, rather than becoming unemployed, becoming members of a job guarantee program. And then, I mean, in that case, you will get stuff for draftsmen because you have to, design some new bridges. But
getting the fit right is going to be the problem. You're still going to have too many draftsmen or not enough or whatever. So you're getting the mix of skills right. And so you are almost certainly going to end up, because everyone always does, the government's going to spend more. I will spend it on infrastructure because at least that adds to the long-term efficiency for the country. At least there's a payback at the end of it because we're left with whatever's being built. But of course, with the other aspect of that is if the government suddenly says, well, okay, there's a downturn going on, we're going to go massively into infrastructure projects, then we know what happens. Everybody who supplies to that infrastructure industry jacks up their prices substantially. So you get a sort of a misallocation of resources in that respect because you've distorted the market.
Well, I mean, what you have as well as a market which has been distorted by neoliberalism for the last 30 or 40 years. Is if you go back to the early post-war period, a lot of the attitude towards unemployment that modern monetary theory has, and an attitude I wholeheartedly support, I better say, comes out of what it was like to allow the Great Depression and the Second World War to occur. One certainly helped cause the other. And when you look at the post-Second World War attitude to unemployment, I think it was beautifully captured by the work of a famous Australian public servant called Nugget Coombs. Nugget because he was small and as solid as a lump of gold. Nugget Coombs wrote the White Paper on Employment in Australia in 1946, I think it was. And the guiding principle of that document was, and I quote, the objective government policy is to maintain such pressure upon employment as to guarantee a shortage of jobs, a shortage of men rather than a shortage of jobs. So in other words, anybody who wanted a job would get one because we'd keep the economy running at that scale. And then to buffer when there were downturns, there were a range of nation building projects that were also designed, and you had a public service that was capable of designing them. We don't have that anymore. So a lot of the difficulties we're getting in bringing in something like a job guarantee is because of the gutting of the public service under the last 40 years of neoliberalism.
It's getting the balance right, isn't it? I just wonder whether you still need an element of competition in the jobs market. So, the recent might have been even last week's podcast. You gave the analogy of musical chairs, where everyone's running around the musical chairs, but there's not enough chairs for everybody to sit in. Now, there's normally with musical chairs, there's only one person who can't sit down. So everyone's racing around trying to get the chairs that are available. So if you've got that element of competition, means that obviously everyone is going to work hard and compete for jobs. It's a pretty boring party game. If the music stops and everyone sits down, after a while you'll say, "Well, why are we doing this?" I mean, conversely, if you had eight people and only 4 chairs, everyone would go, "This is a stupid game. It's all over too quickly." You've got to get the balance right. I'm just thinking, not having that one chair keeps that competition going, and don't you need that in the labour market?
Well, I think what you don't need in the labour market, and this is a major reason why the job guarantee was first proposed by people like Bill Mitchell and Warren Mosler as well, is that the consequences of being unemployed on the individual are pretty devastating. I mean, I've had 2 major bouts of unemployment in my own personal career. One was after I finished my law degree, and the unemployment rate had bumped from the 1.5% was the unemployment rate when I went to university, and that was the recorded unemployment rate. It jumped to 4.5 or 5% in 1974-75 when I was out of university looking for my first job. And position that I basically expected to get, I was finding I was beaten out by these really old blokes in their late 30s who'd been retrenched from their jobs in publishing and were looking for other ones around. And the emotional impact of being unemployed is quite debilitating, and a large, and also of course you're getting barely enough money to pay the bills. So that was back in the 70s. Now you're getting not enough money to pay the bills, so it's become a form of punishment.
Right, and, but if at that period of unemployment you'd been given a bullshit job that had been created by the public sector, that would have stopped you perhaps evolving into what you've evolved into.
It's something which,
it's something psychologically it would be just as damaging as being unemployed, having a job which is meaningless.
If it was meaningless, I mean, the argument is made that people would find these socially responsible jobs and do them effectively. I mean, again, the infrastructure stuff in the States would be a major source of employment, where you could walk away and say, "I helped make that road work," or "I helped to build that bridge." And I've traveled with it.
I helped build that bridge. Don't go on it.
That's a potential. I've got to give that one. But I've numerous times I've been around with builders showing all sorts of levels, from tradies up to people running property companies, and almost without fail they'll say, "I built that place," or "I helped make that place," and there's a sense of pride in that. And that is partially what, rather than having "I was unemployed and did bugger all," that's a major reason why the push that MMT has for a job guarantee itself. But I am of the opinion that there's an element in which this, I'm thinking 100 years in the future rather than just right now. But the reason that workers get a share of what's produced in a capitalist economy is because you can't produce without them. So you've got to pay them something. If we go further down the automation route, if we survive the ecological crisis, I'm certain we're going to experience, if we get through that, ultimately we're going to have a society where you simply don't want much production to be done on the biosphere. I'm saying 100 years. I'm talking when, the transformation which could take production off planet at some point. If that happens, then if your only scheme to give workers a bargain for a share of income is their employment or a job guarantee, then they're going to get screwed in a Hunger Games type future. So I think something resembling a universal basic income is essential where I see human productive society evolving to.
Right. So isn't that better then than the job guarantee? Because part of the idea of the job guarantee obviously is that there's enough money floating around, so everyone's getting paid a wage, and so
the government's creating the money by running a deficit, so that's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So the money is there in the economy. It's going into people's bank accounts because they're now working for the government. They go and spend that in shops, and bit by bit, then the private sector jobs will start to drip back, and then they can move back into the private sector. So that all kind of makes sense. But you could do that without the jobs, couldn't you? If you just had the universal basic income, you could say if you haven't got a job, you're still going to get some money, so you can keep spending, so you can keep the economy ticking over.
Yeah, well, there is an extent to which we start getting caught in a sort of unholy confluence of macroeconomic issues with social sociological issues. So, like if you think about at the moment, if you lose your job, you're unemployed, you're desperate to get back into the workforce, you're being paid shitty wages, you don't contribute much. If you then say, well, let's now make that wage, what you get paid when unemployed, decent, then that means for the economy itself, the decline in demand during a slump is not as deep, so that businesses don't go under as much as they would do without the government spending. That's the macroeconomic side. But the worry people have, if we pay people too much, they're going to say, why should I go back to work? I'm being paid nicely to sit on my ass. And then you get caught in this debate. Like I think a guy called David Slilas or something of that nature in Australia is having a real blarney with Bill Mitchell over this thing because I've probably pronounced his name wrongly, but Slilas is saying, look, I just want a job, a universal basic income, and all this stuff about having to get a job to get paid is a bit of a Protestant work ethic thing that is very, as you said yourself, very similar to the work for the dole. So we've gone from the absolutely strictly accountingly correct side of MMT to one where you're going to have debates over whether it's good or bad to have people feeling pressure to get back into the private sector, good or bad to be paid a substantial amount of money, good or bad to be paid for working versus not working.
Well, he's got a point there, hasn't he? I mean, if you've got the choice between working and not, most people, unless they absolutely love their job, I'd keep working, and I'm absolutely sure you would as well. But for a lot of people, the rest of my family almost certainly would say, yeah, no, we'll just take the money, thanks.
Yeah, and this is one of the issues. I mean, David, by the way, we haven't actually acknowledged David Graeber, I think, on our podcast here, but here's a call out to the late and great David Graeber, because one of David's most recent publications was Bullshit Jobs, when he said he just realized that a whole lot of people do jobs which they can't possibly believe are worthwhile, and then he did a set of surveys, and I think about one third of the workforce saying back, if they didn't do the job, the world would be a better place. So if you have people working in jobs like that, of course, you often have to pay them to not do a job they regard as socially destructive anyway. They're going to say, I'll take the money, thanks. But I hope people that feel that way would be the ones that say, well, let's find something gainful to do. And the advocates for universal basic income, people like Carl Widerquist in the States, and Carl, by the way, was one of the very first people to proofread Debunking Economics for me back in 2000. Carl's attitude is that you're not being paid to do nothing, you're being paid to do anything in a universal basic income. So my own sympathies, I would like to see a combination of the two. I'd like a UBI at a lower level than a job guarantee, and that at a lower level than the average private sector employed position. But I don't see them as being necessarily in conflict, where a lot of the debate I see on the Twitter about this is, the UBI bad, job guarantee good, and vice versa.
I just wonder how practical the idea of the job guarantee is. Just knowing that you have to, and I've not got it in for the public sector, because I have worked in the public sector for quite a chunk of my life in working in the tourism field. And I saw people who worked very hard and a great deal of commitment. And I believe what we were doing actually had some, it was in tourism marketing. I believe we had some good outcomes from doing all of that. But I've also seen a lot of waste happening, and you just wonder. But even if you were to say, well, the private sector is going to do this, we're going to suddenly turn a tap and we're going to create meaningful jobs for thousands or possibly potentially millions of people, and those are only going to be temporary jobs. They're going to go away at some point. So let's not get too attached to them. It just seems like an impossible ask to me.
It's a difficult ask. I mean, it's often said that councils have a lot of positions that are unfilled. And like, for example, particularly in the UK, where the Tories used funding of local government to impose austerity without them having to make any decisions about it by starving the local councils of funds. A classic example where David Campbell wrote to his mother's local council complaining about them shutting down part of the library, and was written back to tell that, well, it's your policies that have caused this, mate, with a 3-page letter from another Tory mayor. So if you then say, well, let's now bring a job guarantee in, then at the council level, they wouldn't have the funds in the direct government funding to hire those librarians again. But they could be told, well, you can take them on the job guarantee. So there are a range of possibilities that, given the extent to which we've, particularly in the UK, imposed the impact of past decades of austerity on the local government. And local government is a potential source of, but at the same time, you and I've had our experience of, I'm sure, of local government corruption as well. Yeah, well,
not just necessarily corruption, but also just inefficiency. And if you're giving more money to governments, then they'll expect that money on an ongoing basis for longer term projects. It's hard to give a local council, for example, saying, well, okay, times are bad, and that's exactly the time, obviously, that they need more money when the economy is facing a downturn. So here's money to employ a whole load of people, but you have to employ people. You can't spend it on mechanizing things. You've got to employ people. Then they'll want those jobs for keeps. They won't want them to be told, oh, you've now got to downsize your council and all the people working for you because they're all going back to the private sector now. It's the cyclical impact on all of this. I know the idea is it's there to try and balance things out, but it seems the cyclical impact seems that you can't create meaningful jobs if they're not going to be around for very long.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I mean, and that's one reason why I think the UBI is actually more flexible, because with a UBI, you're not trying to provide positions for people who say, here's money, which you can spend to keep yourself alive. It would, as I say, it's both universal and basic. So it's basic, but that means you can spend. So the downturn in the private economy isn't as deep as it would be otherwise. And to some extent, I think a lot of this is predicated on the capacity of schemes like this to attenuate the cycles in a capitalist economy. And if that's been my specialty, it's been modelling the endogenous cycles of a monetary capitalist economy. And we get cycles. In 2008 was the classic instance of my models turning up in the real world. But in that world, then if you can reduce the volatility then of the cycles by counter-cyclical spending, which is partly what I modelled in my own Minsky work and a large part of what modern monetary theory says as well, then with less cycles, you won't have the same potential boom and bust problems. You'll be filling smaller holes with smaller changes. So there is a way in which if the policy and the macro side of it works, then the logistic side of the job guarantee won't be as complicated. But it'll still be there. The
idea that the people making the decision about what those jobs are the government, whether it's local government or federal government. I mean, really? They're going to decide what the mix of occupations is? It
can also be community groups. I mean, this is another thing. And again, I haven't read, I've read MMT literature on the accounting side of things, obviously. I haven't read much on the job guarantee. And I've got a feeling Pavlina, Pavlova.
I'm feeling very hungry all of a sudden. You're telling me this while I'm on the last hour of a 16-hour fast at the moment. So don't talk food to me.
I won't mention Pavlova again, I promise.
I know what I'm having for lunch.
Yeah, there you go. But Pavlina, I think, has done some work on the mechanics of how the job guarantee would work, and looking at positions that are necessary to make up for the damaged state of public infrastructure in America, in particular. So there are elements to it, but it's a serious issue, and I think that people should not. You can be very glib and completely justifiably glib about the capacity for the government to finance itself. That's what Stephanie has done in the deficit myth, and 100% correct. There's no problem in her logic of the accounting there. So you can be glib about that. But when you come to the job guarantee, then it is a serious, difficult issue to get the logistics right, and you have to concede you're not going to get them anywhere near perfect. So you have to have a lot of resources thrown at designing a scheme like that. It would be very difficult to pull it off well, and there'll be lots of people who'll be round pegs in square holes. With our example of a draftsman earlier planting trees, there will be the positive. If you see what you're doing is worthwhile, then that gives a positive feedback in the opposite direction. But if you see it as being done for the heck of just giving you a shovel in your hand, which is the work for the dole type stuff that you and I saw people experience in Australia, then it could be a farcical thing rather than something that creates any sense of social solidarity.
And look, you can create 1,000,001 examples of this, but I know somebody who was who worked in the aircraft industry, logistics basically for aircraft parts, and that industry's just completely disappeared. Now he is basically planting trees and digging holes and not getting paid a great deal for it. And his wife is in something to do with beauty, and they're talking about setting up a website to start doing retail business, an online retail business. Mm-hmm. And he could be working on the logistics of that, which is his background, which is surely a better use for him. But he hasn't got the time to do that because he's so exhausted from planting trees all day. So there's that problem, isn't there, where the future potential gets taken away by that short-term gap doing jobs that you're not very good at and jobs that you don't want to do.
Yeah, and that's one reason I think I'd rather see a combination of a universal basic income with the job guarantee. There's a lot of animosity in these web discussions. I think I've mentioned the Australian dispute going on right now with Bill Mitchell and David Slegar. I think his name is Slegar, it's like G-A-R. I'll try to search that while we talk. But the Slegar is slagging off at the modern monetary theory, particularly Bill Mitchell, saying that what you got is just a glorified version of work for the dole. It'll be punishing for people. It won't give them the sort of psychological boost you think it should, and why not go for a UBI? I'm between the two. I think a combination of the two would be a sensible way to go about it. A UBI is a lower level of income, meaning your logistics guy could decide to support his wife's new industry and do that rather than going and planting the trees, and other people who go and plant the trees. I think you need the two.
Yeah. There's a danger as well, isn't there, that if you're creating jobs that aren't necessarily real jobs, I mean, they might have some benefit, but maybe not as much benefit as if we had an economy that was running hot, an economy that was operating efficiently. And one of the downsides of that could be that you could be chewing up resources, the Earth's resources, in an ineffective way. You could be building stuff that's not needed, for example, putting concrete in the ground that doesn't have to be there.
Well, I mean, this is, given the timing of modern monetary theory coming to social and political prominence, a lot of this is now being tied up with what do we do to reverse the damage we've done to the biosphere by ignoring the limits to growth and swallowing the garbage of William Nordhaus if it was actually gospel truth. So in that situation, you are going to want to drastically reduce the amount of garbage being produced by the capitalist economy. Goodbye plastic bags. Goodbye single-use plastics, and goodbye a huge amount of energy consumption in industries like airlines and many others. And then in that situation, you want to be planting trees. You want to be assembling solar power stations, which are to some extent something a relatively unskilled person can get into. You wouldn't be trying that with nuclear power, but you could try with solar and other forms of renewable energy.
Yeah.
So there are certainly positions.
We could replace the plastic bags, couldn't we, with basket weavers? Maybe
you are getting sarcastic here now, aren't you?
Really? Does it show? Look, I mean, I can see that there might be certain sectors that, there's always going to be demand for, and maybe we can create short-term jobs. Like, for example, there's clearly a lack of supply of council housing, and when there's an economic downturn, then maybe we need to plough more resources into that. So if there's people available to do that, then that would be a good thing. But the issue is, even if you were able to transfer people from their previous occupations into building the housing stock, you get to the end and there's good times returning. Are they going to go back to their old jobs? But no, because they're now skilled at whatever it was they were doing in terms of building this housing stock. So you've reskilled them. Potentially they've lost their flexibility.
Yeah, but the mix of jobs is something you and I've actually retrained at various times in our crazy careers. So it is possible to do it to some degree, but when people have developed a set of highly specialized skills in industry that disappears, then in that situation, a job that anybody can do is rather necessary for them in a transitional phase, and hopefully they can build the skills later. I mean, for example, with what COVID is doing right now to the many people who are never going to be a pilot or a I hate to use the word air hostess, but I'm stuck with that. A steward, an air steward. Those positions aren't going to exist anymore. So lots of people. But they will. Are going to have to go somewhere else.
They presumably will in a few years' time. Maybe not to this.
I doubt it. I don't think so.
So I think one final question then. So that's structural change, and so maybe it helps with that. Maybe it expedites that rather than it winding through more slowly without the job guarantee. If we're buying, we buy a lot of stuff from overseas normally because it's cheaper. Isn't there a danger that if we're creating a lot of jobs locally, it's not that's still not going to change. We're still going to be buying stuff from overseas. Potentially, we'll be using jobs locally to create stuff under a false economy that could mean we're creating stuff that nobody wants while still buying stuff from overseas. It just sounds a bit Soviet era to me if we go down that road.
Well, I mean, that's one of the attacks being made on the modern monetary theory case for the job guarantee. But the reply is, well, if you give people a choice between unemployment and lousy pay, which means that the market economy itself suffers more because of the lack of spending. And you've got people who might be considering socialism as better than being unemployed under capitalism. It cuts both ways. But I think a lot of the jobs that people are talking about for a job guarantee are not the sort of thing you would be you're not able to import. You're not talking about making products for sale. You're talking about stuff which is produced in the public sector for general consumption, such the old railroads and bridges. Which everybody benefits from and nobody pays for directly. It's more those sorts of positions. Yeah. And the local council version of that as well.
All of it, of course, requires vision, which is potentially a reason why none of this is going to happen. I'll finish with an anecdote, right? I approached my local council because I live in the home counties in England. And everyone in this town basically used to commute into London to work, and now lots of companies and lots of people are saying, "Well, that's going to change now. We're going to be living in town, and occasionally we might go into London once a week." So I approached the local council and said, "Well, here's a great opportunity for you guys. You could have a rework style property, a really nice office suite where people could be mingling and working in town, but and working from home part of the time, but maybe going into this office where they can mix with people from other industries. That would be very healthy. You could have a very nice cafe there that the council could make money out of. You're getting people into town, so they'd be buying from local cafes, whereas they used to buy from the nearest Pret a Manger in London, of which there's many. In fact, I think the plan for Pret a Manger was, if you can't see a Pret a Manger from the Pret a Manger you're standing at, we need to build another one. You could put all of those bring that into town as well. And the response from the local council was, oh yes, we are working on a brochure for working from home.
A brochure.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, but that would be an example. Enormous opportunity there, and a lot of jobs that could be associated with that. And I just don't think there's the vision exists, generally in the public sector. And I am being very damning of the public sector. I apologise for those people listening who do work in the public sector, but I'm sure everyone's seen a bit of it. I just don't see there's a vision for them to create the jobs that are going to be effective. I think it's a huge opportunity, but I just don't see it happening.
Well, I mean, again, I'll take it back to the 50s and 60s when you had public servants both with the skill level and the philosophy that made it possible. Whereas the last 40 years, which again neoclassical economists have derided and rubbished public service sector positions, while they've also underfunded them or helped them being underfunded.
Well, there's the thing. But there's the thing, isn't it? Those people are now working in the private sector because they're getting paid more. So surely, part of the, we said early on that these public sector jobs would be paying less than the private sector because you don't want to crowd out the private sector. But similarly, for the more senior jobs, for the people who are going to create the vision, you want them to. You need to be competitive with the private sector, don't you?
Well, I mean, you've got a level of security in the public sector. You don't necessarily get it in the private. But one of my family members was a top-class public servant who was involved in procurement design and was finally poached by a private company because he just kept on saying, no, I want to do this for the public benefit. No, I want to do this for public benefit. Oh, for Christ's sake, I can't turn that much money. Okay, I'll come and work for you. But his philosophy throughout was that he wanted to do his work as a public service, and he was damn good at it, and that's why he was poached. So you want to give you need to give people inside the public service enough money that they can't be stolen by the private in that sense. As easily.
Well, and there you hit the problem that the moment they move over to the public sector, are they ever going to go back again?
To the private sector or public sector?
To the private sector. If they worked in the private sector, they went through a period of economic downturn. They're guaranteed a public sector job. They skill up in that area. It's going to be hard to get them to go back to the private sector again because they'll say, well, I'm happy in this job. This job's around forever. And I know about this stuff now. So I don't want to go back to the private sector.
Well, that's where, again, the job guarantee means paying less than you to get into the private sector. And then you get the whole issues, which now people like David Slagar are slinging off it about it, saying, well, it's just another version of work for the dole. And this is, again, why I would prefer to see the advocates of universal basic income, people like Karl Widerquist, in the USA, and the advocates of the job guarantee not shooting each other all the time, but saying let's work out some compromise arrangement where both the UBI and a job guarantee are brought in to get away from the real danger we're trying to both avoid, which is involuntary unemployment and lousy pay, which both ruins the productive capability of human beings, ruins their social skills as well, while also leaving capitalism in the lurch because you've gone into a downturn where government spending could push the economy the opposite direction, and you're not doing it. You're actually amplifying the private sector downturn. So there is. I'd like to see compromise between UBI and JG.
Right, and makes a great deal of sense. We'll leave it there. Look, I am astonished that this discussion is not happening in more places right now, given that where we are around the world. But we'll leave it there for now. Good to talk, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, Matt. Right.
Yeah, certainly Rishi Sunak's approach in the UK now is pretty much if you haven't got a job that's viable, then you've got to get on the dole because he's worried about paying for all of this. It's a shame, isn't it, that the argument has got down to the battle between a virus that's killing people and an artificial construct, which is money, that we have created. And in these deflationary times, we can create more of it, but we don't seem to accept that. Next time, a thought on how we can actually turn people's attitudes around on government debt. What if it meant you owned a stake in your country? If everyone was a bondholder? We'll look at that next time on the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. See you then. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.